Okay, today I'm going to show how to launch an Apache Mesos cluster using our new service, Elastic Apache Mesos. First off, if you go to mesosphere.io in your browser, you'll see that there's a couple of buttons in the middle of the screen. Download Apache Mesos if you want to go the manual route, or the green button, Launch a Mesos Cluster. That'll take you to the URL you want to get to, elastic.mesosphere.io. And once you're there, you see that we've got a three-step process. Basically, it's easy as 3, 2, 1 launch to get a Mesos cluster going on top of Amazon AWS. So here, there's a graphic that shows the configuration on top of EC2 nodes. You'll have 3 Mesos masters and then some number of Mesos slaves. And also keep in mind that, number one, you just pay for the EC2 instances. There's no additional charge to use this. And also, number two, your credentials and all that you're providing are sent directly to Amazon to launch the cluster, and they're never stored anywhere, for at least on the Mesosphere side. Okay, so first step here, choose a cluster size. In this instance, I'm going to go for 6 instances. That will give me 3 Mesos masters and then 3 slaves. For that matter, if I wanted to, I could choose 18 and get a larger cluster. But this will be good for just what we're going to show today. This will run $1.44 per hour. That's the approximate cost coming out of Amazon. Okay, number 2, enter your credentials. I've already entered here what my AWS access key ID is. And I've also entered what my secret access key is, and I'm not going to show that. Don't show that to anybody. The third thing I need to enter, though, is my public key for SSH. And that's something that I've generated on my laptop that I use to SSH into different servers. If you need to get information about any of these credentials, you can see the links here. I've highlighted it in blue where it says, where do I find my AWS credentials? That'll give you access key and secret key. And then down here, how do I create an SSH key? There's a nice tutorial from Git about doing that. Alrighty, next up, read and agree to terms of use and privacy policy. Okay. And finally, I'm going to put in my email address, terry@gmail.com. And click to launch. It'll go ahead and verify with you. Alrighty, confirm and launch. So all the credentials look fine. It's going to make sure that I've got the right email address, because from this point forward, all the communications for what you need to access your cluster is going to be from Mesosphere through to your email address. Again, we're not going to store any kind of credentials or information there. So confirm and launch, click that. Launch is initiated. And you get a note here that you'll get an email, should take about 15 minutes or so. Almost all that time is just a matter of launching the EC2 nodes. It may actually run quicker than that, kind of depending on the weather inside of the Amazon cloud. But we'll check back here in just a moment about that. Okay, at this point, a few more minutes have advanced after, it really wasn't that long. It was about 5 minutes or so before the email came through. But opening up the email, it's a success. Your Apache Mesos cluster is ready. Congratulations from the Mesosphere team. And if you check out, there's a few links here in this email. First off is the actual Mesos cluster. So we'll bring up the Mesos UI by clicking on this first link. That'll take us over to one of the masters among the EC2 nodes that are running the Mesos cluster. There's 3 masters. We'll go over and point to one of them, and then based on leader election, we'll be redirected to the actual master. And when we get the Mesos UI here, shows us the server name, how long ago it was started. It's got 3 slaves, No tasks, no frameworks run yet, but you can see what kind of resources in terms of CPU, memory, etc. Great. Now another thing is we have a list of tutorials that you can run if you want to get started with Hadoop on Mesos, or if you want to learn how to package Hadoop for Mesos. Also Apache Spark, Kronos, Marathon, learning how to build out ETL pipelines by combining Kronos with Hadoop. We'll be adding more and more tutorials here, but let's go ahead and check out one of these. I'm going to go to the Spark tutorial, a few links down. Great. So it takes us over to mesosphere.io/learn/run Spark on Mesos. And we get an alert here. It says that we've personalized the tutorial. That is to say that the IP addresses for your Mesos cluster, for your masters, for your Zookeeper nodes, your name node for HDFS, etc. All of that has been inserted into the different parameters in the tutorial. So it's personalized for you so that you can actually do copy and paste or click on hot links, etc. Great. So we come over here and we see that in step 1 of running Apache Spark on Mesos, we've got the console. And if you want to, you could click on that. It brings up essentially the same thing we just had before. It'll redirect to whichever is the current master. Excellent. So we only need one of those, so I'll close off one. Now the next step is we're going to use SSH to log in to the master at the IP address 23.23.27.49. That IP address will change every time you launch a different one. But I'm going to go down here to this first code block, and to get started with my Apache Spark installation, I'm going to click this button to copy this code block into my clipboard, and then I can cut over to a terminal window. And I'll SSH into that master node. Note that when we're running on AWS, by default we're using Ubuntu servers, and so you have to do ssh-l Ubuntu. That's the way things are set up on Amazon. And then of course the IP address. Okay, answer yes, we do want to connect there. And it should log us in. Great. Okay, so you can see here that we're logged into the Ubuntu user on this node. Now let's cut back over to the tutorial. Again, remember we had provided the SSH public key, and so that's being used now as we connect into this cluster for security. We're going to have to install a couple things before we get busy with building Apache Spark. So the first thing is we're going to use aptitude to install Git. So I'll copy this code block, and then I'll cut back over to my terminal window and paste it. Okay, it asks us if we want to allocate that much room on disk. Say yes. And so now we're going to go through and install Git. All right, great. And then next step. By the way, in these tutorials, you'll notice that there's an entrainment here. We've got previous and next steps, and we've got a slider bar that shows your progress through the tutorial steps. For each step, we're going to show you some actions that you need to take and try to explain those, and also have some links out to additional information. But there'll be code blocks that you'll copy, and of course paste those over into your terminal window. Over on the right-hand side, there's a panel that shows really what the expected outcome of running these commands are. So, for instance, here I've got a code block to install JDK 7 in particular. And this is what it should look like when it runs over on the right-hand side. Okay, so I've copied that command. I'm going to paste it over here in my terminal. And it's off to the races. This will take a little bit. It's installing OpenJDK 7. Time for more coffee. But probably not enough time to fix another coffee. This should be concluding real quick. I'll cut back over and we'll take a look at what the next step is. Okay, great. That'll be to actually get going with the Spark installation. Let me see how it's doing. Almost done. I'm using the term almost loosely or figuratively. Great. Okay. So we've got Get installed, we've got JDK 7, we've got Java installed, and we're going to need those to be able to build Spark and work in Scala, which Spark is written in. So come back over here. Now, this step says we're ready to download Spark. There's a lot of documentation about Spark if you want to drill down into that. We've taken all the relevant commands out for this particular tutorial, but if you do click on the documentation page link there, it'll bring up Spark. There's some excellent documentation. For instance, here I would go with Spark latest release, click on its docs, and we'll follow this mostly with a few changes. Okay, so the first step that we're going to do is to use wget to pull down the tarball for the latest stable Spark. In this case, we're using 0.8.0. So I'll copy that, come over to my terminal window, paste, and it'll download. This is pulling down the tarball for Spark from Apache, and it's Spark that runs with Cloudera CDH4 for the HDFS component. Almost done. Again, the word almost being used figuratively. Let me copy this command to inflate the tarball. That is to take all the parts out of the archive. We're going to use tar. Great. So I'll paste the tar command to extract that tarball, inflate it. Great. And then next, just simply connect into that directory. Great, we're there. You can take a look. That's the Spark distribution. Okay, so for next step, okay, now we're ready to build Spark. And there's something called Scala Build Tool. It's a tool, SBT, usually we call it. In this case, we need to note the Hadoop version that we're building with. We're working with CDH4, Cloudera CDH 4.4.0, and it's MapReduce 1. I'm going to stick all that into an environment variable called Spark Hadoop version, and then I'm going to call SBT with two commands, clean and assembly. Okay, let me copy this here. Cut back over to terminal. Okay, I'm going to paste that. So this command sets up my environment variable, Spark Hadoop version, because it needs to know which Hadoop it's working with. And then I'm going to call an executable for SBT. and I'm going to give it two commands. One is clean and one is assembly. If you look in the current Spark documentation, it'll just tell you that you need to do assembly, and that's wrong. If you're working with multiple Spark builds, if you have any kind of complexities in your environment, you've got to do a clean, otherwise the Spark environment will get all confused. So do a clean before you do an assembly. I think there's a pull request to fix that in the docs. Great. That'll take a little bit. May take several minutes to build. There's probably going to be a lot of warnings. In particular, there's one that always seems to come out, and I hope this gets fixed in an upcoming release. But you'll see something that says cannot stat template files. Don't worry about that. That's expected. So remember, keep calm and use isolation. Time for more coffee. Great. Looking good so far. SBT is chugging right along. It's building Scala 2.9.3, downloading all the relevant parts to put together the compiler and the REPL. And of course you can't see, but actually for your entertainment, I'm juggling right now. We've got some pumpkins left over from Halloween. We're juggling. Actually, 5 of them juggling at once. It's quite amazing, actually. That's usually what we do while we're waiting for Scala to compile. Now, one thing I should point out is that in this tutorial, we're starting with just a bare bones Apache Mesos cluster and nothing special installed. We're going to build Spark on it, and then we're going to run through some simple examples of Spark. The part about building Spark is really the part that takes the longest, and you don't have to do that every time. If you wanted to, you could take and build Spark and save it off at a URL. Put it into, I don't know, Dropbox or S3 or some kind of repository. Someplace where you can grab it and download it from your Apache Mesos cluster on Amazon. That'll save you these steps of building it and packaging it every time. But to start out with, we want to show you the full thing. And it's clipping right along. There's a whole bunch of Java packages inside there. Let's get ready for the next command. Yeah, looking back at the tutorial, once we get past this point, what you can see from the run that was copied here in the log in the panel there, that run had taken 800 seconds. So it's going to take several minutes, not a problem. But the next thing we're going to do is to run a script called make distribution. So let me go ahead and copy that command. Come back over here and just watch all of the Java packages fly by. Gosh, Python never takes this long to compile. Okay, chunking right along. Time for more coffee. Some people measure the length of a tutorial by minutes. I measure them by how many shots of espresso I have to drink. I think I'm currently up to about 3 on this tutorial. Okay, great. Here's some warnings. Again, remain calm. Not to worry. Those warnings look, let's see, it looks like a lot from Hadoop Writer. Oh, right, okay, because it's deprecated. Yeah, you know, Hadoop's going through quite an evolution here from Hadoop 1 to Hadoop 2. A lot of deprecation, a lot of binary incompatibilities, a lot of things breaking on the Hadoop side. Spark, though, looks pretty good. Let's see if there's some other fun things we can look at. While we're waiting, let's show a quick tour of some of the other tutorials. Okay, there's a quick start on Hadoop, running Apache Hadoop on Mesos. There's also how to package Apache Hadoop for Mesos. That's pretty interesting. It's kind of intricate, but you know, it'll take you a little over a half hour to really run through it. It'll show you a few different config parameters that need to be changed. A couple classes that are subclassed, and so you need to rebuild Hadoop and all, but it's a good thing. It makes for a much more elastic kind of Hadoop experience. Running Spark and Mesos, of course, is what we're doing. Running Kronos. Kronos is a distributed cron, effectively. Running services Marathon. Marathon is like a distributed inetd or distributed upstart. And then tying it together, you know, the full shebang is you run Mesos, you launch Marathon, you launch Kronos out of Marathon, and then you launch Hadoop out of Marathon, and then you can go out and build ETL pipelines with Kronos and Hadoop. And while you're at it, let's throw in some Spark. We'll cover those in later tutorials, but I just want to show that these are available under mesosphere.io/learn. Okay, let's come back here and see how we're doing. Aha, 10 warnings found. Not bad. But this is all looking great. We're compiling lots of Scala sources. A few more warnings. Keep in mind, I've been juggling 5 pumpkins this entire time. Here at Mesosphere, we really value your experience in these tutorials, and so we try to provide quality entertainment while we're waiting for our Scala compiler to compile. Ah, here we go. Lots and lots of jars. Go Spark. someday somebody's going to count how many Java classes are actually built into this. Or they'll just rewrite it in C++. Packaging. Okay, it looks like we're getting close here. Again, it's difficult to cut and paste all these commands while juggling 5 pumpkins. But difficult is our middle name. Done. Okay, great. Well, that took about 10 minutes then to complete that build. Again, if you wanted to, once you've packaged up Spark, you can stash it off someplace, at a place where you can download conveniently, like S3, and be able to take out several minutes from this whole exercise. Alrighty, so this next step, we're going to package the newly built Spark distro. We're going to take it and we'll run make distribution.sh, and then we'll build a tarball and put that tarball eventually into HDFS so that all the Mesos slaves can get a hold of the Spark distro that they need. Okay, so make distribution. And note that we had to pass in a -- Hadoop and give it the version string before this Hadoop instance. You can see that it's set there. You can see that yarn is disabled, as it should be. And now we're going to go through. There'll be some other warnings. This will be a bit quicker. It's going to make a distribution into the dist directory, subdirectory there. And we're going to take, and once that's built, it'll take about a minute or so. Once it's built, though, we're going to rename that directory and then make a tarball out of it. Tarball, of course, being a very simple kind of container. Would be nice to package this all up in some more sophisticated form of containerization. Lots and lots of jar files. Okay, great. Looks good. That ran in less than a minute. And you can see there's one warning down the bottom that says cannot stat .template, etc. That can be safely ignored. Okay, I'm going to take the dist. Actually, let's take a look at what was built there. Okay, you can see that there's a directory called dist, all that we just built. I'm going to take and move that to Spark 080 with the version string for Hadoop. And then I'm going to create a tarball out of that. Not too shabby. Okay, should have a tarball. There it is in red. Now, the next step, we need to take that tarball and load it into HDFS so that all the slaves can get it. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the Hadoop command, Hadoop fs, and I'm going to make a directory called /temp in my shared file system. Okay. And then once I've got /temp created in my distributed file system, I will take and move Spark into there. Great. Tarball's there. If I wanted to, I could take a look at what's in that directory, just to confirm. Looks great. Okay, for the next step, okay, now we're just about ready to run, but first off we have to set up the environment variables. So first here, I'll copy this command, connect into the conf directory. Inside there you'll see a number of templates. Come back here, we're going to copy one of those templates to create a file called spark-env.sh, and then I'm going to edit that using Vim. You can use whatever text editor is most convenient. In this case we'll use Vim. I'm more of an Emacs person personally. Okay, if you scroll down here a little bit, we've got 3 lines that we're going to put in there. They've already been populated, again, based on the personalization for this tutorial. So let me copy them here and I can show you. Okay, we'll insert, and there. Now, the first one is Mesos native library. That gives the location in the file system for where libmesos is at. The next one is the Spark executor URI, and so that's going to show where in HDFS the tarball that we just built is located. That way all the slaves will be able to pull it out of the distributed file system. And then the third environment variable is location of the masters. So the zookeeper nodes, zookeeper is running on the masters, and it's got the IP addresses and port numbers for each of those, as well as directory. Great. Okay, going to save that, and just to take a look and see, confirm its contents, I'll cat it out. Looks great. And then, of course, connect up. Back up to the parent directory. Okay, at this point, we're ready to start Spark. So we'll run the Spark shell, and that should give us a prompt, a REPL is how we call it. If you take a look, what's expected here is that we start the local script Spark shell, and it goes through a bunch of startup, and then at the end you get a Scala prompt. So let's try that out. Cut over to the terminal, and again, juggling 5 pumpkins after the 4th latte, sorry, 4th espresso, and yet still managing to cut and paste into a terminal window. There we go. Okay, so Spark is starting up. It's creating a Spark context. That's what you'll be using out of this prompt here. And okay, great. You can see some mentions there of Mesos. We've got Spark running on top of Mesos on AWS. Now let's take a look at what we can do here. We'll go through a fairly simple example of using Spark. First off, I'm going to create a very small data set, a collection, which is basically the numbers from 1 to 10,000. Copy that, paste it over here. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, next up, we're going to come down here and parallelize this, create a distributed data structure, distributed data set. Okay, great. So now we've got something called an RDD. And this is parallelized out through our cluster, our ginormous cluster, which has 3 slave nodes. But the data is out there. And at this point, it's an abstraction as to how many and where those nodes are. They're in your cluster. Mesos is working with Spark, Spark as a framework, and the slaves as executors to allocate the resources as needed and as available. Next step. Okay, what we're going to do is on this distributed data, we're going to run a filter, and we'll say that for items which are less than 10, we'll collect those up. So effectively, we're applying a filter. That's a job that's being distributed across this Spark cluster. And here we go. Great. So you can see starting the job, and you can see the different tasks being serialized out to the different executors out in the cluster, and then it finishes. So this took all of about 14 seconds, looks like. And you end up with an array that goes from 1 to 9. So basically the numbers from 1 to 10,000, which were filtered so that we only keep the ones that are less than 10. Basically 1 to 9. Okay, that's great. Congratulations. We've just run a job distributed on Spark. And of course, these will be much larger, more interesting jobs and workflows in practice, but this basically is what you need to get started. Now, let's take a look at a couple other things here. First off, back in the browser, let's go to the Spark console. It's going to be the Mesos master, that IP address, but on port 4040. And in this case, you'll see that, click on that there, bring it up. Great. So here we've got the stages that have been completed. The job that we ran, that filter, there were 8 tasks. If you saw the different tasks being serialized out, it went from, let's bring this back up, from task 0 to task 7. So there were 8 tasks there. And yeah, 14 seconds. We could drill down and find out more information about this if we wanted to. Great, so we've got a console. If we want, we can take a look at a lot more detail. This job here is not going to be huge amounts of detail. That's good. Okay, and now the next part, let's go back here to the tutorial. Okay, if we go back to the Mesos console, which was the first thing that we launched, go back over here, it's this tab. You'll see now that there's been some different tasks that were staged and finished over here. It shows how many resources are total, how many are used. So really, we've only used 2 gigabytes of memory. There's 17 gigabytes still available there. That's nice. You're getting some statistics about how much capacity you're actually utilizing on your cluster. Up here under Active Frameworks, under the ID there, you can see there's a Spark shell running under user Ubuntu. We'll click on this ID, and it shows you, okay, great, those tasks, all of which have finished. Shows you which node each one's running on. As you can see, there's basically 2 tasks on each node. So we'll click on a link called a sandbox for one of these completed tasks. And so what that does is says, let's go out to the slave for a particular executor, and let's take a look at, okay, where is it running? You get a lot of information up here. Where is it running? What executable was it running? You can see the Spark directory we built previously, the one that had been pulled down off of HDFS. It's also got standard error and standard out log files coming in, and these are getting updated actually. As there are new things coming out, you would see this window being appended. Nothing's really running on this executor right now, so it's not going to append in real time. But this is a good check here if you want to, is go back to the executors, take a look at standard error. If, for instance, you were having some sort of problem with your cluster, you'd probably be seeing something in the log there. You'd probably be seeing some kind of exceptions. But hopefully, this has all been set up properly given our elastic Apache Mesos cluster. Great. Let's see. Probably not much out of standard out, but you might as well take a look. Yeah, not much out there, but still, if you wanted to, it'd be there. Okay. Go back over to the master. Let's go back to our tutorial. Okay, and just to follow along, it's what I showed you already. Again, click on the standard error link. That's a good way to see what's going on. Okay, well, thank you very much. That concludes our tutorial of running Apache Spark on Apache Mesos.